A Decca SG188 record player, built about 1958, 1959, with a nice waffle grill, very heavy lid, revealing the Garrard RC121 Mk2. Seen better days. Atrophied rubber here, it's completely gone hard. It's got the Decca FFSS, loud, soft, removable head shell, which makes life a bit easier for working on the cartridge. Suspension's gone on that. Anyway, this is a stereo valve model, as twin amps inside, and it's supposed to have external speakers. I managed to find a picture of one here. It's supposed to have these speakers that plug in the back. This customer doesn't have those speakers, which is a shame, which just means the stereo will only come out from a single speaker inside, with the combined left and right amps working into it. Luckily online you can find service data, which means I haven't got to mess around trying to work out all the circuit diagram for fixing the amp, which is surely going to need servicing. Here we are, nice clear drawing. Now, one thing you notice with these old equipment is often that they don't have isolating transformer, and this one hasn't. The mains comes in and the chassis is connected directly to the one pole of the mains, and the other mains 240 volts goes up here and is rectified for the power to run the amp, which means there's no earth, and if you're holding onto the chassis and then grab hold of something else at the same time, you can electrocute yourself. So you have to be very careful when working on this equipment. And normally I will fit an isolating transformer to isolate it completely while working on it, so I don't electrocute myself. It relies on the fact that none of the metal stuff should be connected to the chassis. It's a bit of a risk because this is metal. The only way to make it completely safe is to have an isolating transformer, complete isolating transformer, not a medical one, which often has only one pole isolated and it's still no good. A complete isolating transformer to make it safe. And that'll be up to the customer. So, be two parts: taking the deck out, servicing that if possible, and then servicing the valve amp. Few screws, and you can take out most of the bits and pieces. The plinth here is just held on by some screws. Take that out, and then you can take the cover off the speakers. So you can see the speakers in there. There's a center one and one either side elliptical. The amplifier, that's held in by 4 screws as well. The wires are along on this side, so you can lean it up and see inside. There's a hell of a lot of components. There's massive smoothing capacitor. That's going to be iffy. That's any good. These Hunt capacitors have to be changed. They never last over the years. Some of these electrolytics I've found, the Plessy ones, last okay. Quite difficult to get some of these components when they've been soldered in and others soldered in on top of them. All the resistors look okay. Can't see any burning. Big wire wound resistors down here need to be checked. A couple of wax covered capacitors here probably have to be checked if they're high changed if they're high voltage ones. I'm hoping that these other electrolytics won't have to be changed. It's quite difficult to work on. You can't really take it out the cabinet because it's got these wires permanently wired to these speaker extensions on the back, quite a few of them, which would be annoying to unsolder. And just on the other side, you can see I've taken some of the valves out. There's 8 valves altogether along the back, rectifiers. Although it's got a mains transformer, it's not an isolating one. It just generates basically the 6.3 volts or whatever for the heaters for the valves. A stereo, of course, so you've got 2 speaker transformers left and right. Another smoothing capacitor here have to be changed. 275 volts. Can't see the rating. 32. Oh, this is a multiple one. It's a 5, a 10, 5, 15, 32. 3 sections in there. Down here's just the crossover components for the bass speaker and the 2 treble speakers. Just screwed to the bottom of the case. Now that's the amp and the valves. Took a couple of valves out here. A nice GEC one there. This one is a Mullard one, so I don't know whether they've been changed in the past. You expect them all to be the same. ECL 82s, I believe. Fairly common valve. The turntable. Well, this plastic is totally atrophied, and whether or not it can be removed and something else put on is another thing altogether. The pickup. Still got the stylus. It'd be fantastic if it still worked. Stereo. It actually slots into the head and is removable. That's really neat design. You can slide it out. It's got BF-40 made in England. No, made in Holland. Stamped in the side or moulded into the side. If that still worked, it'd be a bonus. There's the plug stereo output. This isn't broken off, which is good if you're not careful. Brown, probably from smoke. Now the underside motor, some components here, all the wheels. Now these springs for supporting the thing, there's 3 of them, they fit into these supports which would normally have some sort of rubber part that's all decayed away and just disintegrated. That rubber needs to be replaced because this sits too low without the proper rubber in there. It hits the wooden surround. Anyway, this can be cleaned up by the looks of it. Just a bit of lubrication, get any hard grease off, make sure the parts work. Which is good. As I said, the main problems are going to be the cartridge if it doesn't work. A turntable mat where you could put some other mat. I've got a mat here from an old Auto Slim, which could be pressed into use probably. If I can get this off, this is kind of bumpy where it's cracked. It's not flat to put another flat thing on. Now you can take the C-clip out. I've taken that out already to remove, which I can't do with one hand. So look inside at the rubber wheel, which was idler, etc., and clean the inside. That is just a valve heater cover. Just goes across the top of the valves when it's in, and there's a bit of metal screening stuck in the bottom. There's some bits of pieces laying in the bottom. I hope they're nothing significant. And the rest of it can be cleaned. Can't get this plate out. I'm not quite sure if it's clipped in. I don't want to break it. If necessary, I try and pop it out. It doesn't come out any other way. and they're the wires going into it there, mains on off, and some wires carrying the connections. And one last thing, the bulging plug, luckily there's a white one, normally they're black Bakelite. There's the original bulging mains plug, only 2 wires, there's no earth, as I said before. So the worst thing about this is the capacitors. These have got to be changed. It's a bit cramped to work. Some connections are very difficult to get at, where all the components are bunched in together. But I would never turn it on until I've changed some of these components. And this whopping capacitor, wow, it's massive. I don't know, it's really heavily soldered in. It's going to be a bit difficult to get it out and test it, but I wouldn't risk turning it on. Well, we've got a variac to turn it on, bring the voltage up, but it's I can't imagine that's going to be working 100%, but you never know. Taking the turntable off, and first of all you notice the big idler rubber wheel. Sometimes they're smaller. It's glazed over on the surface, so that that needs to go on to be ground, get a rubbery surface so it doesn't slip. You can see that the on-off switch here, operated by this little lever, you can check that it works. And there, this is a brake that rubs on the inside, a little felt pad. Normally they wear away, but you can move it forward. The stop works, which is good. So I can take that off. But the main thing I noticed is the thrust race that the turntable sits on when it rotates. This is the wrong size. And we take this off, and we see that the thrust race doesn't have any balls in it. So it should have little ball bearings in those holes for it to rotate, rest on, and help it go round. So this is just going around on friction plastic. So I've got to sort that thrust race out. Now these things here normally seize up. They should be really free. They feel reasonable. So it's just a matter of cleaning and a little oil if necessary. And these other things, springs, make sure that they're moving clean or grease. A lot of cleaning to be done everywhere. Just grind down the surface of the rubber idler wheels till it's nice and rubbery. Take off that hard glaze. Also, if there's any dents, you need to take it down a bit. The diameter of the idler wheel is not that important, as long as it's not a completely different size. It doesn't affect the speed, only the grip on the wheels. Just grind it down a little bit until it's right. While we're here, we might as well check out the on-off switch here. This is a little insulated plate, brass ring. When it pushes up, it goes between these two contacts. You can clean the surface of the brass ring, any bad tarnishing, some very fine paper, 320. Just clean the surface, make sure this ring rotates as well. These things can just pop out of the holders. Check that it hasn't all burnt away. Just clean it up nice and bright, and it just fits back in on those little clips. Let's get it the right way around, like that. And just do the others as well, the other side. And and then you can put the cover back on. It's just a little Bakelite cover. After cleaning, just check the mechanism, spring loaded, pressure as it goes in, and then you know it's going to work fine. Locks in, released over here. Okay, and put the cover back on. To get the thrust race out, it's behind this big gear wheel here. It's there's a bit of a design flaw in a way. Means you can't pull it out, so you've got to undo the screws holding the spindle in and pull the spindle out so that you can get this thrust race out and maybe replace it, either put some balls in it or fit another one. Taking the spindle out, now you can get to the thrust race. It's got a spacer underneath. Then there's a thrust race, the cage that's supposed to hold the ball bearings, and there should be another thrust race on top. Well, which was missing. There was just another bit of aluminium ring on the top, which was not a thrust race. The thrust races are ground steel for accuracy, so I've just got to find something, hopefully another thrust race that I can put on there. So I've got some balls to go into the race. 3/32 is the size, using model cast, so you can find some packet. Just got to put them in, grease it up with some nice decent grease, and fit it back in. I think these two plates are slightly different size. The bottom one is a tight fit, and the upper one is a slightly looser fit. Just don't get them mixed up. Which is fine, it works, but the other problem was these two spindles were then rubbing on the underside of here, but luckily they're adjustable. You undo this nut here and two grub screws on the motor pulley, one either side, and you can adjust these up and down. There's the steps of the different speeds, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a bit low at the moment, and when I put the pulley on, you have to align the pulley with the steps when you turn this up and down. Obviously down and then up, 16. So that's a bit of an adjustment just to stop it rubbing on there, but it's very free now in running. If I just put this on, and I've tested the mechanism. Whoops. Let's engage the mechanism now. It's switched off. It's got a brake, so if I just turn that to manual, it's off again. But now it actually is resting on that center bearing and actually moves now. Manual. That's it. I've got it in manual now. So this can actually spin on the bearing. So it's just a matter of setting the idler gears and the pulley, the idler wheel and the pulley, so it doesn't rub on the underneath of this. It's dropped down quite a bit, but as I say, it's necessary, otherwise it didn't work. The shaft that holds the rubber idler gear, this one that goes in that hole there, is supposed to be able to rotate. It was seized solid, the grease had set like super glue, and was causing the idler gear not to be able to pull up against the inside of the turntable platter. So I had to get it out. You have to use a very hot soldering iron, heat it up until you can pull it out, clean it up, and then it's got two E-clips. You oil it and put it back in and fit the E-clip one either side. So then this can this holds this part here, which can then move like that between those two pegs. Right, adjusting the height of these two things so they don't hit the underneath of the table. Now this one's got two grub screws on, and this one has got a screw there which you raise and lower. So it's got that position there is neutral, i.e. the idler wheel is not pressed on anything, so it doesn't get a dent. Now I'll just show you that again. That's free running 16. It's on the very thin one at the top. As you change to 33, it pulls it away and then drops it in. 45 pulls it away, and the important one, the 78, as it's such a big step, pulls it away and just drops it in. Now it's important that when it's running, it's actually centered on the little pulley step that it's supposed to be running on, and not half on one and half on the other. And it is. So then you do up the grub screws and put the C-clip back on, and then just double check now that this is working. And let's just put it on neutral. Yeah, it's turning out without rubbing. Those spindles that were sticking up, shafts, they're rubbing on the underside of here. So that was a bit of a fiddle, but now I've got the thrust race, the mechanism working, and which is something I don't think was working at all before on this deck. Just finished greasing everything up. This knob here, the one on the top, was jammed, and it hardly moved at all. So I took that screw out, and when you screw that in, it was pressing the top lever onto the bottom one so tight it was sticking. So I just took that out and put a small washer just underneath, just to give it a little bit of clearance, and now it's fine. I've cleaned it up and greased it underneath as well. Everything works. It's funny, this double lever thing's a bit weird. And I've tried to clean this, the white finish up. It's very stained, and I've greased this as well. It's got a spring on it. Can't do it with one hand, but it goes up and down. Oh, that goes up that way for holding the arm on. That was stuck before, so now I can just put it in. That just clips around there now. Grease all the mechanism and check that it's working okay on this levers here. Just checking the cartridge with a 45. Let's just put it on. I've got it into an interface and off to a stereo, and amazingly the cartridge is working alright. So that's good news. On to do the amplifier in the unit next. take the amp out, get it onto the bench we're working on. Take the rear plates off with 2 nuts, just hold the rear plates on. Unplug this. You do have to unsolder from the amp the light, 2 wires, the mains 2 wires, and you have to unsolder 3 wires on each side to this this little network that goes to the speakers. But anyway, it's not too difficult. Just make a drawing or take a photo first to make sure you know where they're going to go back on, and then we can get it back over to the bench. So it'd be easy to work on now, to look at all these components. Those are the luckily these plates come off with all the wires. You won't going to have to unsolder all them. And that's just the wires that went to the crossover network inside, 3 on each side. Everything's in stereo, of course, so now we can check out all these components. Taking this whopping smoothing capacitor out to test it, just a couple of wires to disconnect. It's a 60 plus 250 microfarads. 275 DC working, and it's got red, yellow, black connectors. Well, on the yellow 250 microfarads, it's coming out almost perfect. The lower ESR and almost spot on, but on the red, we connect black to red. It's just in circuit leaky, which is a shame. Not getting anything. Is it worth risking using the one section, the yellow section, and then I don't know, using the yellow section, the big part, still working, and then put another capacitor in place of the red one? When was this made? Can't see the date code on it. CCL, British made. So I've got a selection of modern capacitors here, 50, 60 years later after this one was made. There's been quite an advance in capacitors. Here's one that's 220 microfarads at 385 volts, which we could use in place of this 251, I'm sure. And then the 60 microfarads, well, I've got a 68 microfarad one, that's pretty small, 450 volts, 100 microfarads at 400 volts, high operating temperature, 105 degrees as opposed to 85, that's why it's bigger. And there's another one here, 220 microfarads, 385 volts. It's a little bit smaller than that one. Anyway, that one will go in that, fit that clamp, which would be useful, so we can put that one in. And we can stick the other one in somewhere. I'm sure we can stick the other one in and be fine. Yeah, I don't think it's worth risking keeping that in there after all these years. Unfortunately, this big yellow smoothing capacitor has also had it. If you analyse, just says low capacitance across the terminals. On the circuit diagram, it's 3 sections, 16, 16, 32. But weirdly, I can see a modification in here where this resistor here has got been shorted across to give just that rail along there. There's a little wire underneath. This is a bit of a fiddle. When I take these wires and components off, got to make sure that you know where they all go back. And to get a 3-part capacitor that'll fit in there. I'm not sure, so that's going to be a bit annoying. Had to replace quite a lot of the components in here, the critical ones anyway, because some of the resistors drift off quite a bit, but they're not very critical. For instance, the 1 megohm ones go a bit higher, but some are, especially on the power output stage here. You've got the 270 ohms, 270 ohms, and a 39 ohm, which set the current flow through these valves. Now this 39 ohm one is not 100% necessary, but I'm just measuring one here. It's only 11 ohms. Well, it could fail. I mean, eventually it's taking quite a lot of current, so I'm going to replace that. These 270 ohms were all over the place. There's one here measured about 350 ohms, so it's good to replace them. So I've replaced them all with some power ones, 270 ohms. Also the capacitors, these yellow plastic capacitors, they look worse for the wear, and some of them they have drifted off quite a lot. 6 microfarads, supposed to be 25. So I've replaced all those as well with modern ones, which are really a lot smaller. 1, 2, 3, 4, and one on the preamps. And that's around this stage here with those capacitors there, and this one here I replaced as well. Remember, it's in stereo, so there's twice as many. I've replaced all the high voltage capacitors, these ones here, which take all the high voltage, and then also the matching one here, but it might as well make sure they match up. So those are all, there's 239 ohms, one there, and one along here somewhere I've got to replace. Those are all the modern capacitors I put in. 1, 2, 3, 4. So just 4. Anyway, they've had to be replaced. It's essential. And oh, there's a couple down here as well. There's one in there and one in there. Now the smoothing capacitors. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5, I think. Oh yeah, one down here. You can't see it. It goes all the way down here to the bottom. That's a big one. So 5. They were all gone. And when you replace them, you check these resistors as well. These ones are normally okay. That one there, you have to make sure that it takes a lot of heat. But it was okay. It's this one. So the capacitors, because they were huge things here, which are not gonna, they're a lot smaller now. So that one fitted in the clamp nice. I've several taped 2 here down to the bottom, and then with this bus bar holding them in place, they're not going to come out. And the last 2, there were some tags down on the tag board that was spare, so I've sold them onto there and taken them to the earth. Doesn't look that pretty, but it does the job. That's essential to make sure they're all working. And this big resistor here, it's the current limiting ones to the valves straight off the mains, comes in, rectifies the mains. 100 ohm, 100 ohm. This one, look, you see how hot it gets, is still 95 ohms. The other one, which was a different, smaller size, was completely going. So I had a big 100 ohm resistors I've put in there, just fits luckily. The valves, I've tested all the valves. These 2 were good, 100%, still working great. The rectifiers, the ECC83 Malab was still working fine, but these ones, the ECL 82s, 4 of them were all shot, completely hopelessly gone. So I've got to get 4 of them. The next thing to do is when I've just got to put the 39 ohm resistors in. I don't think I've got to change any other components, except when I'm going to test it, it's going to be a bit difficult because this is out the case and you've got the speaker connection, so I'm going to have to connect a dummy load to one side while I test the other side. Or anyway, you've got to have speaker loads on the valves. I've got to connect the mains to this transformer, which generates the 6.3 volts heater supplies. That's all that does. The mains come straight in, so I'm going to use a isolating transformer. Isolates the mains completely, so I can work on this without fear of electrocution, especially if you test in if you connect up a mains tester that is earthed as well, and if you have the earth running through the connections and onto the chassis, and the plugs are wired up the wrong way round, that's not going to do your tester any good at all. So got to isolate it because the chassis is connected to the mains negative. The other problem is, of course, it's got all the controls for volume, tone, etc. are on a separate panel still in the cabinet, and they come in on this plug into this connection on the other side. So it's this section here. So I've got to disconnect a resistor or a short circuit to ground on the grid of that to make sure it doesn't go funny. If it's open, just open and pick up a lot of noise, could oscillate. So I've just got to short that down on both channels. This valve won't be connected to anything. The output that won't be connected, and the input won't be connected to the cartridge. So that one will be on its own, but it's got a resistor to ground, so it's not going to oscillate, and I'll be able to check the voltages on it as well. So what I do is ramp up the voltage slowly through the isolating transformer using a variac, watch the current, monitor some of the essential voltage points, the voltage rail mainly, just to make sure that there's no short drawing a lot of current. Measure the voltages on the 2 points on the rail. Other side of that resistor. Can also measure the voltage coming out of this transformer to make sure it hasn't got a short circuit and gone wrong. And if you've got measure the voltage once it starts ramping up, measure the voltage on the power valves to see what current they're drawing, make sure that there's no problem with the circuit around them. So that's all the pile of components I've been changing so far, and hopefully it's not going to give me too many problems when we start testing it. I've connected the circuit up once to a speaker, once to a dummy load. I've got the mains coming in via a isolating transformer. I've only got 216 volts coming in at the moment. It's drawing half an amp, which is 100 watts, which is this is only rated at 100 watts. Checking the voltages, on the circuit drawing, checking the voltage here, which is up there, is only 205 volts. It probably get a bit higher if I put the mains up to 235. 205. I've got the mains coming in 211, measured on the rectifier after the 100 ohm resistor, just there. I'm measuring the half of the cycle of the heater, which is only about 3 volts AC at the moment, which is good enough on there on the transformer. And then I'm measuring the two I'm measuring the voltages here. It says 16 volts on one valve, and on the other valve, now this pair of valves here only giving 12.45 and 11.45, so they're not that greatly balanced. And the other pair, I need to move the probes over just to measure what they're drawing at exactly the same points. I've got to work out why this should be a little bit higher on those two valves. There's a little bit of hum from the speaker, but not very much. I'm just going to check the other two. I've connected to the other 2 points on the other side of the stereo pair, the other two valves. They're reading 13, 3, 13. They're quite close. Much better than much closer to what I expected. Still a little bit low. It might be that this pair of valves might be slightly off. I'll try another pair. By the way, these two resistors do get warm, but not overly hot. Change the pair of valves to a better match set, and 13, 5, 14. Slightly more. I've put the voltage up to fractionally at the moment. The input voltage is that's the rail voltage. You need 208 and put about 225 in, just drawing over half an amp. So this pair is better than the other pair for sure. Let's try another set. Right, put a nice new pair of new old stock ECL 82 valves in, and they're working really well. 13.4, almost a perfect pair. So decent pair of expensive valves are working very nice indeed, and the other channel was good too. So we're pretty much good to go. I've turned the mains up to 235 volts. In fact, it's there's probably a little bit of dropping in the isolation transformers. 228 volts on the base of the valve, of the rectifier valve. Heaters will double that, about 6.3, almost spot on. One pair of valves is reading 14.45. 4.6 and 14.38, so they're pretty closely matched, measured on the cathodes. And the rail voltage 216. It's a little bit down on what they say. 235 they said, but it's good enough. That's the other pair of valves. 14.16, 14.31, measured at 235 volts input. AC. After checking all the voltages are correct, I've measured them all around the circuit and they're all close enough. There's nothing particularly out. I've now connected up a pot between the preamp valve and here, because this tone controls and volume control are still in the cabinet. I've just put a pot here, just connected to the back of the this connector where the controls come in from the cabinet, just to see if the audio's working. I've connected a signal to the input socket, which normally comes from the record deck, and I've just got on the tablet just a signal generator, and I'm playing the sound through a speaker up there on one channel. There's some hum pickup on this, that's all. And just to make sure it's working, and it is working, bit more volume, that hum pickup. up 50 hertz. I think the speaker packs up. Anyway, so pretty close now to putting it back in the cabinet, connecting up the tone and volume controls and the speaker in the cabinet, and see how it gets on. On old equipment, you should always check that the mains plug is wired up correctly and the wires aren't pulled out, or these clamps come undone. Also, I like to fit a fairly low amp fuse, a 2 or 3 amp. This has got a 3 in it, and you might want to actually change the plug to a more modern one with shielded terminals. Anyway, in this one particularly, as the chassis is connected to the mains, I wanted to make sure that the negative, it comes in on one of these poles on here, make a note which one it is, and then check in the cabinet that it's actually the negative that is connected through to the chassis and not the live, because you never know how people have wired these up incorrectly. There's an earth wire running on this one, but the earth is not actually connected in this equipment at all. So on old equipment, you should always check the plugs and the wiring. I want to check that capacitor down there, which is actually wired across this speaker to bypass all the treble, and it's got an inductor choke there as well, just to allow the bass to that. But if that capacitor's gone very low, it wouldn't be good. According to the drawing, which I found, says, I can't really read the value of that. It looks like 50 microfarad, but that can't be right. There's the choke, and some other components on here actually aren't in this amp. It shows some capacitors in series with the side speakers, these, one each side, but there's no capacitor in series with them. They're wired off, they're wired to this tag board, and then it's wired off to the amp. So they obviously changed the design. Anyway, I'm going to have to unsolder one end of this capacitor and try and measure it. Well, that capacitor, that should be 50 microfarads, is reading 140 microfarads. I think it'd be best left out. It's no good as it is. It's too large, really, and it means it's dried out, and that's why the capacitance going up. On the capacitor, it actually says 100 volts, 6 volts DC reversible is written on this side that you just can't see. So that's probably good enough. I'm going to put it back in. But the other ones that should be on these speakers were never in here. There's no sign of them ever being soldered anywhere. I've checked the inductor, that's okay. I've positioned the amp back in, and now I've wired up the terminals from the two speaker panels. Luckily I'd took a photo just to make sure of the connections here, that they all line up. They have color coded the wires, red, black and green, and on this side yellow to there, black and blue. So they've been connected up. I don't need to screw these to the back just yet while I'm testing. So, and I've left the original main, the temporary mains cable I put on, that'll go to the transformer isolating before I wire up the mains to the switch, so I can actually, if there's anything wrong, it'll be easier to take it out. There are all the valves, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the screen lead from the front panel comes out onto this multi-pin old bulging plug, which goes in to the amp. It goes in, it's a really tight fit, which is good. So it's just about ready to go. Put some power on it. knobs can be eased off without breaking. They've got a spring clip on the back, and they half moon helps you clean this panel. Now there were some felt washers underneath the knob, probably just to stop it scraping if you pushed it down too far, but they've completely disintegrated as well. You could either do without them, or you can put some little you can get little felt pads used in model cars, body washers. You could put the hole's a bit small, but you can make it a bit bigger if necessary, if you can't find anything to put in there. If you just want to replace everything. Anyway, now this panel's off, I can clean it a bit better, clean the knobs as well. By removing the nuts on the controls with the, if you can find a socket to fit them, you can remove the panel, and then it exposes the sub-chassis underneath with the controls on, and it looks like they can be removed as well with these two screws, and there's a bulb screws in there, and then we can clean the pots, get rid of this dirt as well. There are the controls exposed. Should be able to squirt in some contact cleaner on these, some very ancient capacitors, and some resistors and that for the tone controls, and the pretty ancient on-off switch. I've turned it in and ramped the voltage up from a variac right over there, 225 volts, should be a little bit higher, through the isolating transformer. The record player needs a turntable mat. I've taken the old one off, it was so bad. I'm trying to get another one now, and the player's up there, we know that works. So we've got to clean this up and put some new rubbers in here that support the deck, which have completely gone. So work in progress, coming along. Beginning to put it back together again. I've fixed the amp back in. The screws go through grommets. One of the grommets is completely disintegrated, but I put a new one in. It just gives it a bit of suspension from the chassis against vibration. Cleaned up this aluminium or tin plated cover heat shield over the valves. Screwed in the speaker connections to the back. Wired up the mains plugs, checking the positive and negative was correct, so that it was wired with the negative onto the chassis. The on-off switch works. Put the panel back in after cleaning it up. The light still works, which is brilliant. And I did remove this capacitor across the speaker. I found it sounded a lot better when that was not shorting this speaker out. It's interesting that these speakers are wired out of phase because the center one is connected across them, and if you play the mono record, nothing would come out the middle, so that's how they've got round that, to make sure some bass comes out of here. If the bass is the same in left and right, nothing would come out. So they did a good job on that, I think. Anyway, I'm going to just do play some music through it from a tablet before I put the record deck in, just to check the quality of the sound. And the record deck connects to that, just a little connection block there that they put in for the record deck. Feeding in some music from a tablet into the connection down there, which is where the record deck cartridge normally plugs in. Checking the controls volume. Goes very loud, treble, goes very bright. Oops, that's gone off. The bass. You need to shut the top for the bass, I think. Very clear. So we know the amp and the speakers are working. So when I put the deck in, any sound that's not right, well, we know will be from the cartridge. This goes very loud, by the way, and I have checked it with another song with more bass, and the bass comes up quite nicely.
Across the gulf of space,
the speech is very clear.
Minds immeasurably superior to ours regarded this earth with envious eyes, and slowly and surely they drew their plans against us.
It was very loud. Very punchy sound, good sound. So just continue putting the back on the speakers, putting the deck in, and then trying to get the cartridge sound right as well. Before I put it back together and temporarily I'm going to test the deck, I'm going to try and clean up the vinyl before I put it back together. It'd be easier. First of all, I tried this. I found it pretty good up to now for cleaning vinyl. If that doesn't work, got a few other things. You don't want to take the colour out of it though. So I'm going to clean up these and the case. Well, that's veneered, so that has to be polished. This is plastic, so the lettering's already virtually disappeared, but you have to be careful not to disappear it anymore. Cleaning the vinyl, I've just done this side, and if you compare it to this side, I don't know if it shows up very well, but it's come up fairly clean. I've used a sort of medium scrubbing brush as well. Try and get the dirt out. It's come up a lot cleaner anyway. Now these little metal rings here are the supports for the turntable that the springs rest on. Now the original ones were sort of a rubber which has gone really hard and disintegrated and squashed up, and the springs sat too low. So you can get these adhesive felt pads for furniture legs, feet, I think, in various sizes. Put a bigger one, the light one around the outside, and then I've stuck a couple on top here, and the springs rest on them, and it enables the table to just float above this with some acoustic insulation to vibrations. So these just disintegrate. So you just have to improvise, do whatever you can on some of these old things. I haven't seen these supports before. Anyway, continue cleaning it up, and so I can get the record decks put in and tested. Playing weight 5.67 grams. Recommended, I think, for this cartridge is 6 grams, so at least that's set right. I fitted a replacement diamond tip for stereo records in place of the old one, which I think was a bit out of shape. And I put the record deck in and started playing single. The treble control works very well. The bass control has virtually no effect, probably because it's closed back, but I'm not sure. Not closed in the bass speaker. And the deck has got some suspension now on those springs. Background hum's not too bad at that sort of volume, but it does go up a bit. That's a big clang. But it's all back together again now. Looking a lot cleaner than it did. Still got to get a rubber mat for the turntable. It sounds pretty good with this LP at fairly low levels. It does suffer from some sort of feedback at high levels, but I think that's possibly because it needs a decent turntable mat, I hope. Or I might have to increase the playing pressure. Just a bit of cosmetic cleaning to be done, polishing up the cabinet. Otherwise, it's come up, got a little grill on the back as well. There's a bit of hum vibration from the transformer, not from the speaker, which is a bit annoying, but you can't hear it if, after you're a few feet away. Sounds not too bad. I'm going to hopefully get rid of any problems with the volume on this. It is sprung now. There you go. The auto mechanism works and it turns off. The brake makes a bit of a dong. Okay, I've increased the playing weight slightly, which has improved the sound quite a bit, and you can see that's nicely suspended now. So let's try again. A single. Let's turn it up a bit. Can put it up quite loud. Actually, it sounds a lot better the further away you go. It seems to throw the sound out. I'll turn it down a bit for YouTube. I want to get a mat, and I'll try it again with an LP with a proper rubber mat on it. Finally managed to get a rubber mat, proper Garrard one from slightly bigger than the original, but it fits perfectly under the retainer in the middle. Cleaned it up, and it looks it's nice and flexible. Looks really nice now. So a couple of singles, new stylus. It's not a changeover stylus, so it's just fixed and on LP or stereo type at the moment. Everything's cleaned up. I cleaned the grill. Every single one of these in the waffle grill are cleaned, and polished the outside and cleaned the inside. This is sprung, so it's about as best as I can do. Just play it a bit for you. Goes very loud, and with the extension speakers, which it should have, I think the sound would be a lot better as well. It's unusual levers, manual and auto. It's a bit weird to twist. I'll play a little bit and then I'll cut it. It's got a lot of treble, but I'm assuming with the external speakers the bass would come up. I'll just switch to the next one. Should be this one. It will return on its own at the end. And obviously it plays LPs as well. I might as well put one on. Just got one here. Down here, you just twist it to 33. Let's go. Strong spring on that thing. Did I actually manage to twist it far enough? It's weirdly strong spring. Old record. Turn it down. So it's got a stop as well, but you want it to, and it's got a manual operation, but you want it to, it's awkward. It's very close to the pickup on the lifting thing, so the design isn't perfect, especially for inside this sunken place that it's in. Anyway, it's all good, everything's working. That mark is from the top of that. There's the clip, you can just, it's on a little sprung loaded clip, holds the arm in position. On off switch here. And as I said before, this should be rotated to the park position, which is one way or the other. It doesn't go 360. That position there with nothing written on it is the idling wheel is moved away, so you can't get a dent on it. Most people would forget. It's not got a lot of pressure on it, but it does rest on it slightly. The lid's very heavy. It'd be quite easy if you're not careful to drop it and slam it down, because it's got no spring to hold it, make it go up and down smoothly. So there it is, finished.